Hi, everyone. This is Hal Krosman with Screenwriting U, and today we're going to be talking about the ultra high-speed rewrite process. I'm going to walk you through this process, and let me just show you some of what's going to come up with it. I think rewriting is probably one of the most important processes that you can learn and master, and it becomes especially important when there's deadlines. So here's what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk about the need for speed, right? When do you know that you need to write faster? Then we're going to talk about what causes speed. What are the kinds of situations, what are the kinds of changes that you can make that will allow you to write at a much, much higher speed? At that point, we're going to go to the levels of a rewrite so that you can clearly see what skills you're going to be using, all that kind of thing, so that you know where you are in a rewrite process. I'll give you a countdown. So, and this is something that we promised. I'll give you a countdown of if you have 30 days, what do you do? If you have, 3 days, if you have 3 hours, right? What's different in the strategies you apply when you have different time periods? And then finally, at the end, we will talk about the upcoming 10-week professional rewrite class. This is for those of you who really want to be masters at writing high-quality scripts. There's a saying, if you want to be a great writer, become a great rewriter. So we'll talk about that at that point for those of you who want to join us for that, and I'll give you a special. Now, let's jump into it. The need for speed. There's a bunch of different levels here, but we'll just make them really simple. If you just chose your own goals, you're going to write it at one speed, right? It's like if you decide, all right, I want to finish this screenplay, depending upon, when you want to finish it, you'll write at different speeds. So if you say, I want to finish this screenplay in 10 days, and especially if you've just done one draft on it and you're rewriting at that point, you're going to go into some pretty high speed work. But if you're just doing a thing where you're going, I'm writing a script and it'll come to me. It might take you 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year. Just depends, right? But there are other levels. If there's a contest deadline, we have to speed up. So especially when you know that the deadline, let's say the deadline for the contest is 5 days from now, and you want to make some major changes on your script, you probably need to add some speed to that. You need to increase the speed. If you're getting notes from a producer, you may be operating on deadlines. They may ask you to have something back to them in 2 days. And that's it could be anything from rewrite a couple of scenes to do a page 1 rewrite on this thing, and they're giving you a completely unrealistic deadline. Because that happens sometimes in this industry. So, and then there's pre-production. And what happens when you're getting close to production is they suddenly start having things that they thought were going to be included that aren't. They may have the budget drop. They may have certain actors drop out. They may lose locations. They may lose the amount of days that they can shoot. All kinds of things could happen that might require that you do a rewrite in order to get this movie produced. And when those happen, you've got a hard deadline. You're going into production 7 days from now, and the lead character just dropped out. And instead of a 40-year-old male that everybody knew, we now have a 19-year-old female who is going to come in, and you've got to rewrite her entire role to fit that particular actress. Okay, so there's a need for speed there. Now, let's take a look at our model. And this is a real simple way to be thinking about this, because what I've noticed is sometimes people don't actually recognize when they need to move faster. And I've had that happen to me before, where it's like, oh my God, I just got caught up on this thing and I didn't even notice that the deadline was coming up. So our model, when you need speed, it starts with the deadline. It doesn't start with, what do I need to do? It starts with, when is the deadline? Do I have 3 days, 5 days, 30 days, 3 months? When is the deadline? I'm going to decide my strategies based on that. Out of that, you create a plan. And I'll be giving you some plans here in just a little bit. And then you apply the speed principles to make sure that you can get that stuff done in time. And finally, you use pro rewrite skills, because no matter where you are and how fast you write and how much you rewrite and all of those kinds of things, if you're not using higher level rewrite skills, it's just a lot of editing. So this kind of stuff is pretty important. All right. How do deadlines affect us? And this is part of keeping you from getting caught off guard. When you have approaching deadlines, and they're over here to the right there, so you see the arrow going. When you have approaching deadlines, right? Like here on the left, we start at maybe 30 days, all the way to the right, we're going to be at 3 hours. Now, you might have more time, you might have less time. How do you deal with that? So what we noticed was, when people have plenty of time, they have a tendency to go to the need for perfection. They want to make sure everything is perfect. And that's totally okay. If you've got plenty of time, you can write and rewrite and edit and re-edit. You have plenty of time to do that kind of thing. But when you get over towards the right, and you've only got a day or 3 hours or something like that, or you're on the set and the actor and the director are standing there asking you to change something right now, speed becomes incredibly important. And this is something that we noticed. As we get closer to the deadline, we are forced to prioritize and eliminate lower priorities. So, and I've been through this multiple times. I've been through this with producers on projects. I've been through this where I was there specifically to work with the writer. But a lot of times a producer will, when we're over here with 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, they'll give us this whole list of all the things they want changed in the script. As we get down to this 10-day mark, if half of those things haven't been done, they're going to start tossing them in the trash. They're going to start going, wait a minute here. We have 30 things to do. We have 10 days. We could probably only get 10 of these done. Which ones are the most important? As you get down to 1 day, it's like the only thing you focus on is what's important. And a lot of times things that they say, no, we really need it to be this way, we'll get down to this 1 day or 3 hour deadline, and they will be sacrificing those things in order to go into production. You can't have, 30 people waiting while a producer is trying to make sure that they get that one scene in. They will give that up in a heartbeat when we get over here. So it's the same thing with us as writers, right? Way back here, 30 days, you have all kinds of luxury of time. You've got plenty of time to think about it. You can be picky. You can say, no, I want it to be better. I just haven't figured it out yet. When you get over to the right-hand side where you've only got a few hours, you can't be picky. It's like, I've got to get something improved right now. What are the things I can get improved? So just notice, deadlines cause a change in how you think and how you create. So keep that in mind. All right, what causes speed? I'm going to give you 4 principles here that'll help. The first one, if you are trying to increase your speed, let go of the need to be perfect. Perfection and speed are on opposite, as you saw just a moment ago, opposite ends of the spectrum. Anytime you're trying to be perfect, that slows things down. Anytime you're willing to give that up, it speeds things up. So perfectionism is part of another process. Don't let it interfere with this one. Flow now, critique later. Notice I've got a typo there, which is in the perfect place, right? I let go of the need to be perfect. And it's like, it really, that should say critique later. Be okay with that. Don't criticize as you create. And this is the other part. Please, these two right here are also on opposite ends. If you are highly critical of yourself, you are shutting down creativity. So let go of that when you need to create. There's a lot of times where, like if I'm working with a writer, I'll say something like, especially if they're a perfectionist, I'll say, here, let's come up with 5 bad ways to do it on the way to something great. And I actually had somebody yesterday say to me, he says, that really goes against my grain. And I said, yes, I know, because he was a perfectionist. And then we did the brainstorm session where we were coming up with bad ideas, and one of them triggered his creativity, and he spit out something that was incredible that I don't think would have shown up if he would have kept criticizing himself and demanding perfection. He had to let go of that in order to create. Okay. Principle 2, temporarily lower your standards to increase your speed. Now, here's what this means. It means you are, well, here, let me put it up. You are maintaining your high vision, but you are getting control of your standards for this draft. So a lot of times people they'll say, well, I want this script to be amazing and perfect. Therefore, this draft, second draft, third draft has to be perfect. And they get writer's block. They shut themselves down. They're criticizing too much. They've raised the standards to such a high level that they can't deal with it. So what we do at that point is you lower the standards and you say, wait a minute, my job is simply to improve what I can on this draft and allow myself to keep creating. I'm not trying to make it perfect. I am not trying to make this draft the best script ever. I'm going to save that for the final draft. And when you get to that final draft, then yes, your standards need to be really high. But on the earlier drafts, lower the standards and you'll start creating more. So principle number 3, select something you can improve right now. Now, let me tell you how this goes. A lot of times you may look across your script. Let's say you're on a second draft and you look across your script and you see some big problems. And maybe it's something that you don't know how to solve right this moment. All right, skip that and go find something you can improve right now, right? Even if it's the final scene, just go find anything you can improve right now. When you are creating and when you're trying to move quickly, being able to make these kinds of decisions gets more done. A lot of times in the midst of trying to solve the thing that you didn't think, and this is this thing right here, solving these small parts often gets you moving and creating, and it'll help you solve other things. And that brings us to principle 4. If one thing isn't working, quickly move to something else. And you can make your own decisions on this, but I have a 1-minute rule. If I'm working on something and like, let's say it's a screenplay and I can't figure out this scene inside of 1 minute, I move to another scene I can solve. Because you've got to be able to take care of your creative side. Don't do that thing where, and this is part of writer's block when people do this. If you say, I can't move to another scene until I solve this one. Please notice what you're doing. You're saying, I can't create any place else until this is perfect. What that does is it shuts down all that other creativity. And you're on the way to writer's block as soon as you say that. So keep that in mind. If one thing isn't working, if you can't solve it in a minute, what I do to protect my own creativity is I go find something else that I can create in that script. And what that does, a lot of times while you're creating that, like let's say I move to the scene after the midpoint, because I know that the midpoint, we just completely disrupted this character's life. How's that character going to respond? Right? So I move to that scene and I rewrite that scene. In the midst of rewriting that scene, I may figure out how to make my inciting incident stronger. So again, that's the job is to be able to do that. Don't let yourself ever be stalled for more than a few minutes. That old thing they used to say, and some people still say it. They'll say, butt to the chair, fingers to the keys, stare at that blank screen until something comes to you. Do not do that. Do not stare at a blank screen for more than 1 minute. And this is my advice from working with thousands of writers. And it's my advice from spending a lot of time studying and working on creativity. I designed classes for corporations on this subject 20 years ago. And it's that thing, if you dig a hole and you say, I can't move forward until I solve this, it's pretty much you just dug a hole you're going to bury yourself in. So get out of that as fast as possible. Don't stare at that blank screen. Come up with something you can write and do it. And by the way, if you're looking at a problem and you get sucked in and you spend let's say 5 minutes staring at it, and the whole time you're thinking, I can't solve this, what I would do is I would get out of your chair. I would exit that room. I'd walk around someplace you haven't been recently, and get yourself out of that emotional state. Put yourself in a much more positive emotional state. Remember a time you were highly creative. And as soon as you figure it out, then sit down and start writing. You want to train your creative mind that anytime you're sitting there in front of your script, you are improving it, you are elevating it, you are creating. So now that you have those, let's go. Here are the levels of a rewrite. And it's important to know these because sometimes you'll have a problem on one level and be trying to fix it on a different one. Sometimes I've seen people completely skip some of these. So let's just kind of go through them real fast here. Level number 1, notice it's at the very bottom. It is the biggest of all of them. The truth is if I did this triangle properly, it would expand beyond the borders of the right and the left-hand side. Story. Story begins at the beginning of page 1 or before, and it ends at the end of the final page. So it is present at every moment. Your story could be, it really comprises your concept, your theme, your plot, and your structure, right? So you want to, on an early draft, make sure you get the story working. If the story isn't working, that's a point at which you need to go back and solve it down here. Don't try to solve a story that isn't working up in dialogue. That's, to have a character explain something so that you can fix your plot hole, that's kind of a real problem. So be careful about that. Second one up is characters, right? And here we're mainly talking about your lead characters, those 2 to 4 people who this whole story is about start to finish. And there's a lot of things you can do with them. We'll talk about those later. Third is situation. Now, in my opinion, situation is an untapped opportunity for a lot of people. What the situation means is, what are the circumstances of this scene or the circumstances of this act, right? So if you see, like for instance, when I was judging contest, I saw a lot of scripts that their opening scene were two characters sitting there talking to each other about their lives. And there was no situation. There was nothing that they were embroiled in, nothing that was difficult that they were living through. No, there was no challenging situation there. They were just telling us backstory, basically. You could have taken that exact same dialogue and put it in a difficult situation. Like, let's say you have two people sitting at the diner and they're arguing. And they're having their argument, and it's like, okay. But if we put that same thing in front of a judge and they're suing each other, well, there's much more at stake. Somebody's about to make a decision. It's going to change their lives in some way, right? If we had that exact same situation, say, and they had guns in their hands, that right there might make a huge difference, because at any moment, one of them can shoot. Right? So it's like the situation changes how we experience the dialogue and who the characters are. So it is a worthwhile thing to be considering. Number 4, action. And there's two kinds of actions that I'll give you. The first one is what actors call busy work. And that means they're sipping their coffee. They are taking a bite of their food. Maybe they're walking, or they're playing pool or something like that. And it's just busy work. It has no impact on the scene whatsoever. I try to write as little of that as possible. The other one is where you actually have what I call meaningful action, which means the meaning of the scene is delivered through the action, right? So if somebody says, "I don't like you," to another person, we get a little bit of that meaning. But if they slap them in the face, we really get it. No matter what they say, we're experiencing what just happened, right? So the action, meaningful action, means the action delivers the meaning of the scene. We'll talk about that later. Number 5 is dialogue. And there's lots of levels at which dialogue can happen. We may talk about a few of those, but it's just someplace to notice. Number 6 now is words. So notice that we've gone up, and as we're getting up, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because most of the meaning should be beneath this surface, the one on the left-hand side. Right? It's like most of your meaning should come through in your action, your situations, your characters, and your story. If you do that, then your dialogue and your description has so much more, you have so much more creative freedom. If you've ever found yourself going, how do I cram this into the dialogue? How do I explain the physics? How do I tell them, how do I have one character tell the other character what just happened? If you're having to cram more meaning into the dialogue, a lot of times it means you should just find a way to put it beneath the surface. And then number 7, right-hand side over here, is interest. And I put this over there because I think it's so important in today's market, right? With all the streamer channels, with all the other things that are keeping our interest, with people sitting there watching TikTok on their phones while the movie's going, we need to capture their interest, and we need to keep capturing it. So this becomes an incredibly important part of when you're rewriting. And then number 8, left-hand side, subtext. What's the meaning beneath the surface, that when they say their lines, the audience is already perceiving that meaning? And even if they go opposite the meaning with their lines of dialogue, we still get that meaning. Go back to the slapping thing. Somebody says, if their line of dialogue is, I don't like you, that's one thing. But what if they said, oh yeah, I do like you, and then they slapped, right? Which meaning do we get? And it comes through, in this case, it comes through the action, right? It might come through the situation. If somebody just filed a lawsuit against you and you're in court and you just lost all that money, and the person walks over and says, I think that you're a wonderful person and I hope you have a great life. But they just sued you and took away all the money you had in your whole life, right? It's like, no matter how many nice things they say at that moment, we're still perceiving they just took $1 million from us. So all of this is important when it comes to a rewrite. And your job is simply to create a plan that'll work with your deadlines. So let's start with the deadlines. Countdown to a great script. Let's say you have 30 days. So if you have 30 days or more, then you focus all the way at the bottom. You make sure first that these big picture problems are solved. And let me join you here. There we are. You make sure that these big picture problems are solved. The actions you're going to take, you're going to solve structure and plot problems, right? So, I was talking with a script consultant the other day, and I said, so what are the biggest things that you're seeing that are keeping people from getting a recommend on coverage? And she said, structure problems. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because that's one of the first things that you're doing. But if you have any structure problems, what you want to do at this point is you want to clearly identify them. Now, let me give you some steps here. First, does your script fulfill the concept or the log line in a strong way? So that's incredibly important. We had somebody who they got a script to about 20 producers, and every producer turned it down. And they mentioned that one said that it didn't deliver on the pitch. So I asked him 3 questions, the writer, and the third one was, how much of the story is based in subplots? And he said, well, I have 3 subplots and one of them takes up most of the second act. And it's like, okay, so then he's not delivering on the pitch. He's telling a story about these subplots. And so we took a look at that. If you have any structure points that aren't strong, I would do everything you can to rewrite them. And the easiest way to do this is to essentially pull the structure out of the script, put them on a single page. And if you're doing a 3-act structure, you're going to list your opening, your inciting incident, your first act turning point, your midpoint, second act turning point, climax, and resolution, right? So you list all of those down and then write out in 1 or 2 sentences how each one is showing up in the script. When you have them all by themselves without all the drama built around them, you can see pretty clearly which ones need to be improved. I had somebody who kept telling me their structure was fine. We asked them to do that, and they were actually missing the midpoint. They had no midpoint. So they didn't have a moment at which, everything shifts for that character and suddenly they're up against what they think is 10 times the opposition as to what they thought, or where life just completely changes. They're still on the journey, but they've lost their entire motivation or something like that. That midpoint being gone makes a big difference. Any one of those structure points not working is like a major thing, and it's something that's pretty easy to solve. Number 3, do most of the scenes express the theme in some way? And this is, again, pretty easy. Write the theme down on a piece of paper and put it next to your script and go through page by page and just keep looking back and forth between that theme and what's in that scene. Then theme, then the next scene, theme, then the next scene. Keep it at the top of your mind as you're looking at it. That's all you're focusing on. It will become pretty clear which ones don't deliver. Now, let's say you have 15 days. So we shift at this point. If you have 15 days, it's now about focusing on character action and dialogue. And by the way, if you have 30 days, you did the stuff that we just talked about, in 10 days or so, and now you're to this, right? But here, what you want to do is you want to go to the character profiles that you created. And if you haven't created any, I would recommend you do create some, because they're incredibly useful, especially when it comes to these two things, character action and dialogue. So the checklist. First, you're going to create those character profiles for your lead characters. You're going to make sure that you have something pretty strong. Like I'm always looking at lead characters and I'm thinking, what are their traits? What's their motivation? What's their want and their need, right? What are their fears? What are their wounds, right? It's like, and really, what's their subtext? What are they hiding that they're not talking about? Now, you could create a profile with just those 4 or 5 things, or you could go to, 10 other things. What I don't put in my profiles, by the way, is I don't care if they like coffee or tea. That kind of stuff doesn't matter, right? I was looking at this one character profile and it started with that: coffee or tea, boxers or briefs, house shoes or barefoot. And I know it was basically for a novel, but none of those things tell me how this character is going to make a life and death situation. So for what we're doing here, you want to get right to the things that these characters are driven by, that they are living through, that they make all of their decisions through. And you do that, and first, you'll know your characters really well. Second, you'll be able to improve the action of the dialogue. So once you've done that, you take one character at a time and you look at all their actions and their dialogue to make sure that it expresses those profiles, right? So if we go back to the simple profile I just gave you, which I think had either 4 or 5 things in it, it's got 4 traits, for instance, that this character has. I'd be looking to see, do those traits show up in their actions? Like, let's say I have a character who is passive and we get to the first scene where something bad happens and they punch the person. Okay, that's not that character, unless there's something else going on. Maybe they overreact to situations because they're so afraid or something. I don't know. But I would be looking at that and going, you know what? Chances are, if this character is passive, they're probably going to deal with this situation in a passive way. They may be the one getting bullied. I don't know. But do their actions match who we're saying they are in the profile? Also, is their dialogue coming from that profile? And this is where, if you can take a lead character, create a really interesting profile, and then make sure their actions and their dialogue comes from that, then what happens is every time that character's on the screen, every time they speak, every time they take action, they're engaging. And it's easy for an actor or an actress to go, wow, I feel like I know who this character is, and I want to be the one taking those actions and saying those lines. You can do it. And then build subtext into the dialogue. And the easiest form of subtext is They say one thing, they mean another. Now, let me just back this up in a different way. Start with, what do they mean? Right? It's like, again, if we have a character who is violent, let's say, so it's the opposite of the passive character, their meaning is going to come across in their physical actions. They don't have to say the same thing that goes with the meaning. So if that character is going to punch somebody, they don't have to say, you better shut up or I'll punch you, right? It's like, then that comes across as completely on the nose. So you go to what they mean. What they mean is they're expressing some kind of violence. They're expressing some kind of anger, or whatever that is. But they could say something exactly opposite. They could say something wonderful, something very nice. They could say something about another character. They could say something about, I don't know why you brought me here. Boom. Their confusion. I don't know. But whatever it is, you start by going, what do they mean? What is the meaning that's going to come across? And then how could I have them say something different than that works? Okay. By the way, if you want to see an interesting version of that, there's a whole bunch of them, but in the movie, I think it was Network, one character, she is an executive at the TV network, and she and her boyfriend at that time go to a hotel. He's an older guy who just retired from the TV network, and as they're having sex, she gives him a pitch for a TV series that she wants to pitch. So even though they're having sex, what she really means, she wants to get his feedback on this pitch, and she's talking about it the whole time, right? So they're doing one thing and she's saying a completely different thing, which actually probably is the more important thing to her. It was interesting. Okay, we got 10 days. So now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on engaging the reader. Hopefully these other things are already done. If they're not done, well, then you have to look and see how much time you have. But if you're trying to engage the reader, what I'd be going to is situations and interest techniques. So this is usually different than what most people do. A lot of people, what they try to do is they try to improve the wordsmithing. There are some people who think wordsmithing is rewriting, and that's not true. It's just one step in the rewrite process. So here we go. Checklist. First, check to make sure that your situations challenge your lead characters. If you have a lead character who is in situation after situation after situation that's easy, or that doesn't require them to do anything, all they're going to do is talk, the first thing I'd be doing is looking and saying, how could I make this situation challenging, right? And start brainstorming. What all could you do? Let's say that they're having this conversation talking about their motivation in life. And let's pretend that we have this character, we're in the opening scene, and they're sitting there and they're talking about how, they've always thought they've been wanting to propose to this woman. It's just, she's the right one for me. What's your advice? And now the camera pans back and we see that they're handcuffed to, the jail cell, and who they're talking to is the guard who's standing outside of it. That changes our meaning in that situation. And if they're really going to propose, that may be a problem. But it's like, I'm telling you, that conversation, the, hey, should I propose or should I not propose, doesn't have to happen in an easy place. You can create all kinds of situations where that conversation could happen. It could happen as the bride is walking up the aisle to marry someone else. It could happen as, the person is in the hospital and about to die. It could happen just before the bookie breaks the guy's arm because he has gambled too much and hasn't paid his bills. It could happen in a war situation. There's thousands and thousands of situations that could occur in. Your job is to find one that makes it really interesting. So 8, include both types of action, right? Meaningful action and kind of busy work kind of action. Let's see what it says here. Visual action, the action you see on the screen. I think that's important. And then meaningful action, those two. Visual action, like if you're talking like an action story or something like that, you're going to see it all over the place. If you are, even if we're in a romantic movie and where they're driving is someplace that really is romantic, they're in Rome, or they're on the countryside, or they're driving, down the 101, looking out at the ocean and stuff like that. Meaningful action we already talked about. And then number 9, do an entire pass of the script to try to make it more interesting. And to me, this is, if you leave this pass out, if you go, well, the script is interesting to me, that's good enough. Your problem is the person who is going to be reading it to decide if this movie gets made or if this movie goes to the producer doesn't have all the emotional connection that you have to your story, right? So your job is to get them engaged in every single scene. So I'd be looking through every scene and saying, can I make it more interesting? Now you've got 3 days. Focus now would be wordsmithing. And again, here, I'm assuming on these things that we're talking a couple of hours a day all the way through. If you've got 3 days and you've got 12 hours a day and you are highly committed, well, you could go back and do some of the previous things. But if you've only got a couple hours each night, then it's about wordsmithing here. And your job is to improve the dialogue and the description. So let me give you a couple of techniques for that. First, improve the entertainment value of your dialogue. And this means you're going to first take advantage of emotional moments, right? So be looking for what's the emotion in this scene. The emotion in the scene can give you really 2 different things that make a huge difference. One is the character could speak through that emotion. And it's like, listen, if you think about it, if somebody's in rage, they talk in a very, very, very different way than if they're in love. Right? And this is the thing to know. Anytime you have a scene where and the audience knows this character is in this particular emotional state, they can speak through that, and they're going to speak in a different way. Their tone of voice is going to be different, all of those kinds of things, but also the words they say. Then the other question is, what's the best thing or the worst thing they could say at this moment? Now, it doesn't mean you have to go to the best or the worst, right? But if you can define that, if you can look and go, what is the best or the worst thing they could say, that kind of gives you the extremes and how do they come across, right? I was at a funeral, and I had 2 people there. My wife was one of them, and she's amazing at funerals. She grew up in a church where she had to attend every funeral, and so from an early age, she understands everything that's going on in one of those. But I also had with me a friend who had never been to a funeral, and he must have said 15 things that I would say were the worst thing he could have said at that moment. And he's just unaware. He had no idea. Now, sometimes people say the worst thing because they're angry or they're upset or they got cheated or something bad happened to them. But sometimes it's just strictly, they don't know. And you start playing with these things and you can find some really interesting ways to entertain the audience. Then number 11, description. Go for short, meaningful, and visual. What you don't want to do is write like you're in a novel. And I really mean this. Listen, you don't have to have full sentences. Like, for instance, this, it could be go for short, period, meaningful, period, visual, period. That's the way you write in a screenplay many times. So here's the other thing. 95% should follow the show, don't tell rule, which means what do we see on the screen, not what's going on inside the character. So if you're telling us internal experiences, you've got about 5%, and it needs to be done well. There are certain strategies, I won't talk about them right now, but there are certain strategies that you can use to do this, where you tell kind of what's going on inside, but you have to do it in a certain way that works for a screenplay. What you don't want to do is have any full sentence that says, Johnny's so sad over what happened last week or over the breakup that he just can't focus, right? It's like every bit of that was internal. It was last week. None of it is what we're seeing on the screen. So be careful about that. Now we've got a day, 1 day or less. Our job here is to make the script a fast read. And again, if you've got, 12 hours in that day and you're going to be working the whole time and you totally believe in yourself and you can get it done, spectacular. But otherwise, I'd be looking for how do we edit the dialogue and description in a way that has people be able to fly through this script. This is something, by the way, that most people don't think about, what makes a fast read versus a slow read or a dense read. But I'll tell you, readers are always thinking about this. I've had so many producers when I'd say, what script would you recommend we read? They'll say, well, there's this script that just came out. It's a really fast read. It's titled blah, blah, blah. They'll tell me it's a fast read before they even tell me the title or the genre or the pitch. So that's how important this is. Checklist. First, where can you cut any unnecessary description? Anything that's not necessary, consider cutting it. We don't need to know what's sitting on the desk in front of this person, right? We don't need the kind of novelistic descriptions where the character walks into the room and then, the next 2 pages tell us every single thing we see in that room. That kind of stuff, even if it's 1 or 2 sentences, is too much. And by the way, ask yourself this: if the line is gone, will the reader miss it? So it's not, if that line is gone, will I miss it as the writer, but will the reader miss it? If the reader doesn't miss it, consider cutting it. Then read through all the lines, the description of the dialogue, to see if there's anything that confuses or isn't clear. And let me say this is important. There are a lot of emotions you want the reader to feel. But the one emotion you do not want them feeling is confusion. And I've had lots of readers tell me this, and I completely understand, if you confuse them at any point, a lot of them are just done with the script right then, because that implies that the writer didn't understand their own story, and it's not ready. So just be careful about that. Now we're at 3 hours. And 3 hours means basically at this point, you are proofreading. So that's the focus, right? You've only got a little bit of time. All you're trying to do at that point is to search the script for unnoticed errors. So I've got a couple of things to give you here. First one is, of course, you just kind of go one last read. You're looking for typos or grammar or incomplete sentences and those kinds of things. But you may have had this happen to you. I've had it happen to me a lot. I'll go through a script and it's like, okay, we've got it. It's perfect. Everything's good. And then somebody else will come back to me and say, wow, you didn't even notice this line said, she walks through the, and then the next line started with the door. And it has two thes. I didn't see that, right? There's a lot of things that you miss when you're reading it through from start to finish. So a proofreader that we had hired did this. He was amazing at finding the tiniest mistakes. And I asked him how he did it, and he said he read the script backwards. Now, he didn't read exactly word for word backwards. He read one sentence at a time backwards. So he started with the very last sentence, then he read the sentence before that, then the sentence before that, then the sentence before that. And he continued all the way through. And he said, when you're reading it backwards, you're not in the emotion of the story. You're not in the logic of how this script progresses. Instead, you're only focusing on one sentence at a time with no other internal experience besides, is this sentence correct? Are there any grammatical errors here, right? So that's just something to consider. This is something that can make a difference. Multiple times I thought scripts were correct, and I'd go through and do it this way, and I'd find 4 or 5 errors. So it helps. Okay, now so when you're doing a full rewrite, you need to focus on all of these, not just one or two, not just the top ones. Again, if most of your rewrite process is wordsmithing, that's level 5 and 6. And you want to be careful about that. That's what you want to do near a final draft, right? And maybe if you're on draft 7 and 8 is your final draft, then you're just focusing on wordsmithing. But if you're having story problems and you're trying to wordsmith it to solve it, that's going to be kind of a problem. And it actually will keep you from being able to write something that's really great. So what we've done so far is we've done an overview of the deadline-oriented kind of rewrite. And my hope is that it's already helped you and helped you, be able to see some things that you could do. But there's a difference between this and a professional rewrite. When people are writing and they're trying to actually break into the industry, if they're trying to get a manager, if they're trying to get a producer, you need to be writing at a professional level. And writing is about 80% of your writing success is based on rewriting. So stay with me here for about 5 minutes. Let me just walk you through this professional level screenwriting class. And at the end, I'll give you a special on this program for those of you who really want to become a great writer. So this program, just like what you just saw, so we just went through all of those different levels of the triangle. This one does the same thing. We start at the very bottom level. So the first 3 lessons are all just about making sure that the story works, that bottom level is both sound and is the best it can be. So we start by clarifying the story so that you get really clear on really what your pitch is. How are you going to sell this to a producer? What's the pitch? What is the way you're delivering that? You then elevate the structure, and then you go in and elevate the beats of the story. These two, Elevating the structure will solve one of the biggest problems that most people have, that somewhere along the way they have something that's weak. And that doesn't mean anything bad. It just means you do another draft. Elevating the beats of the story, that means every single beat, every scene along the way, you're going to make sure it's the best it can be. Now, then after that, then we're going to go to characters. And here you'll create a profile, or if you already have one, you will look at that profile and see if it's delivering on all the points that we're pointing to, because those are things that actors need in order to play those roles. You're going to improve each character's individual story. And we've had lots of times where, especially on the antagonist, where people focused on one of the two, either the protagonist or the antagonist, and the other didn't come across as strong. Finding the individual stories, determining what they are, and elevate them can make a big difference. And then you're going to look at how do you introduce these characters. Now, by the way, a lot of people think a character introduction is just the 4 sentences you say about the character where you can kind of get away with anything and you can tell their backstory. I think that's just essentially a description. To me, the character introduction is the entire scene that they're in. You are going to give a scene to that lead character, and its whole purpose is to sell that character to an actor. So this is incredibly important if you're trying to break in. On number 7 and 8 here, you're going to do something that you probably haven't seen before. You're going to go through and rate the entertainment value of every single scene. We've had so many people who have had huge breakthroughs because what they're doing is they're reading through the script and they're living with the emotion that they created this through and all of those kinds of things, where if they rate it entirely based on entertainment, how entertaining is this scene on a 1 to 5? Is it a 5? Is it a great scene from an entertainment perspective? Or is this a scene where you put a lot of exposition in and it's average? It's a 2, right? You're going to find the scenes that need improvement and you'll know exactly how to improve them. Then when we get to this one, 10, 11, and 12, this is all about now the meaningful action. You're looking at the scenes and you're asking yourself, how do I make the action in these scenes more meaningful? If you can do this with 1/4 of your scenes, if you can take 25% of your scenes and make the action more meaningful, you may have increased the quality of your script by 50% right there. It makes a huge difference. We'll also be working with scene structures to double the drama. And this is something most people don't even talk about, scene structures. What's the structure of this scene? And by the way, there's like 15 different scene structures. You change the structure of the scene, you might triple the quality of that scene. These kinds of things make a huge difference. And scene transitions. This is one, we had one lady who said her manager told her when she saw the way she did scene transitions, she knew she was a pro. Now, what this means basically is how do you go from one scene to another scene, especially when the scenes are contrasting, right? If you go from a scene where there's like crazy violence in it, and now you go to a scene where everything is calm and we're seeing somebody else's life, how do you transition from the first scene to the second? Because how you do that will have them, again, see you as a pro or not. And then it's about dialogue. And again, we're going to give you some easy ways to make sure that your character's dialogue is unique. Now, this is mainly for your lead characters. They need to be incredibly strong. Here's what this isn't. This isn't putting in ahs and ums. It's not giving them an accent. It's not having them stutter or any of those kinds of things. What we're talking about is a character is going to say different words based on who they are. They're going to have different meanings that are going to come across based on who they are, right? So your lead characters, their dialogue needs to be unique. And it's really important that they're not saying anything that could be in some other movie. So this right here, for some people, this may be the point where you really do make a huge shift in the quality of your dialogue. Memorable lines, you know, when you think of memorable lines, it's like, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, or you had me at hello, or make them an offer they can't refuse. Originally, I was thinking that was mainly just about the line, right? It's just about the line of dialogue. Those are all kind of cool ways to say things. But what we found out when we started analyzing, and we analyzed about 30 of these, we looked at how the scene was written, how it was set up in the movie, and what kind of an impact did it have. What we found out was the line is the least important part of it. All the rest is incredibly important. Let me give you an example. If you looked at the line, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, right? It's at the end of the movie. It's at a point where that character is completely fed up with the other one. We have been wanting him to say that for a long time. If we took that same line and we put it in the opening scene, it would have no meaning whatsoever. Right? But because of the way it was set up, because of the way it was designed, and because of the way that final scene was written, that line is incredibly powerful, and it's something people said over and over and over after that. So these kinds of things make a huge difference. And then it's about your endings and your beginnings. And let me say something here. I've asked a lot of producers, what are the most important scenes in a screenplay? Almost all of them say the beginning and the ending. I was talking with one producer, his name is Dean Devlin. He's the producer of Independence Day. And I said, why do producers keep saying that? And he says, well, the ending is the last thing an audience sees before they walk out of the theater. So he said, it's what they're going to be tweeting about immediately afterwards, right? So that creates buzz. That's important. He said, the beginning is how I sell a writer to a studio. So if it's an unknown writer, that opening scene is what is essentially your advertisement saying that you're amazing. Now, by the way, if I was going to, give you just a simple piece of advice, those two, after you've written your script and you think it's the best it can be, go back and make your opening and your ending 50% better. It'll make a huge difference as to how people will respond to you. Now, having said that, then it's about description. And the one thing we're going to give you in this description that's going to be different, we have, everybody talks about description that delivers on a visual level, but we have a bunch of ways to make it emotional without you telling people the internal state. So that was something we focused on because it makes a huge difference in the quality of the read. This program, it's a 10-week class. It starts on May 22nd. As soon as you sign up, you'll start getting our pre-emails. There are going to be some movies we're going to ask you to watch. There are going to be some steps we're going to ask you to take before you start the class. So there'll be 4 of those that will prepare you for this class before you even get there. And then once you get there at that point, starting May 1st, from that point on, the lessons come out Mondays and Thursdays, or excuse me, May 22nd. I'm sorry, that's the date is May 22nd. The lessons come out Mondays and Thursdays, and so you'll have 3 days in between to do whatever rewrite we had asked you to do at that point. You just take these steps. By the time you're done, you're going to have a script that is significantly more valuable. And let me just be clear on this. And I'll give you a special in just a second. The big value to you in this program, there's 3 things. First one is it's going to make a big improvement in your script, right? And not just this script, but every script you write from now on, every script you've already written that you want to rewrite. We had a guy who told me that his script was perfect. He said, there's not a single thing that needs to be changed. For some reason, he still chose to take the class. He went through it. At the end, he sent me an email and he said, I was shocked. He said, I found more than 50 different places I could elevate that script. And I was like, wow, good for you. About a year later, he sent me another email and he said, you're not going to believe this. I just won the grand prize in one of the biggest contests there is. And it was on the script that I rewrote in this program. So this stuff makes a difference. Second thing that this is going to do as you go through this isn't going to just improve your writing. It's going to elevate who you are as a writer, because you will be coming from understanding all of these things. You will have these skills down. You will know what you're doing. You'll already have used them with at least 1 or 2 scripts by then. And because of that, you have now stepped up to a completely different level as a screenwriter. And that brings us to the third thing, which in my opinion is where we're all going, which is it prepares you to work with managers and producers. And please know, when you get a manager, you are going to be rewriting constantly. Everything you write, they're going to have you rewrite. And so knowing the process is going to make a big difference. But also, because this is what you also do with producers, when a manager sees you can use all of these skills, you have a much better chance that they'll consider signing you, because they know that you know what you're doing when you're working with producers. So again, the normal price on this is $350. It starts on May 22nd. The special that we're going to give you, and this is for the first 20 people, the first 20 get in at $249, which saves you $100 on this program. I promise you, this program is well worth the full price. It's well worth it for what it's going to do for your writing from now on. But if you can get in at the $249, please do. If you already know that you want to take this, if you already know that you want to make this kind of improvement in your writing and in your scripts, then jump in as quickly as possible. Because as soon as it hits 20, then the price is going to bounce up another $50. And once that hits 20, it'll bounce up to the full price. So all you got to do is just go to that link, bit.ly/I am rewriting. And if it's not clickable right now, just write it down, plug it into your browser where you normally put a web address, click return, and then just go through the sign-up process. Within an hour, you'll get the first of those emails to prepare you. And then they'll continue from that point on. By the time we get into this class, you'll be coming in ready to go. You'll have watched the example movies. You'll know exactly what you're doing. And your focus every day will be elevating the important parts of your script that will have you have more success. We've had multiple writers who have gone through this program who have either been finalists or winners in some of the big contests. We have had many, many writers who have gone through this program who have had their script optioned or ended up getting a manager because of their abilities. So that's it for me today. Last thing I'll tell you on this, if you want to become a great screenwriter, you need to become great at rewriting, and this is a chance to do that. Now, listen, thank you guys for being with me today. I hope what we already did made a difference for you, and I'll see you another time. This is Hal Crosman at Screenwriting U, wishing you the absolute best. Bye-bye, everyone.